You say you're waiting on God, but what if He's been standing at the finish line waiting on you? We sit, we pray, we ask, and then we wait. But waiting without movement is not faith. It's fear dressed in religious language. He gave you breathe, He gave you vision, He gave you that stirring in your chest, not so you could bury it under comfort, but so you could build something with it. You whisper, God, give me a sign, but the sign is the idea you keep ignoring. The sign is the discomfort that won't let you sleep. The sign is that door you've walked past 100 times, waiting for it to open, while refusing to knock. You think God is silent, maybe He already spoke, and now He's waiting for your reply, because God doesn't steer parked cars. He moves with those who move. He meets you at the edge of obedience, not the couch of delay. He's not interested in your comfort. He's interested in your calling, and that calling doesn't come fully assembled. It comes piece by piece, step by step, obedience by obedience. You want the map. He gave you a lamp, and lamps don't show the whole road. They show the next step, and the next step after that. You cry out, Lord, change my life. But He's whispering, then change your choices. He's not a genie, He's a guide, and guides only lead those who are willing to follow. The delay is not divine, it's deliberate. It's the result of staying when you were told to go, of hiding when you were called to stand, of doubting when you were commanded to trust. You say, but I'm scared. So was Moses. So was Esther. So was Gideon. But fear didn't excuse them. It refined them. God is not looking for your perfection. He's waiting for your permission. Permission to interrupt, to stretch, to send. Because the world won't change because you prayed about it. It will change because you moved through it, because you stopped waiting for fire to fall from heaven and decided to become the spark. So today, don't wait for the sea to part. Step into it. Don't wait for the sign. Be the sign. You're not waiting on God. He's been waiting on you, and He still is. You're not stuck because God hasn't moved. You're stuck because you haven't. We've been taught to wait, to be still, to be patient, and yes, there is wisdom in silence, strength in surrender, power in pausing. But too often we confuse waiting on God with avoiding responsibility, because stillness is not the same as obedience, and inactivity is not the same as trust. We pray, God, show me what to do, while ignoring the nudge to do what we already know. We hold back saying, I'm waiting for confirmation. But confirmation already came in the form of conviction. Conviction that we've silenced with distraction, with delay, with fear that we dressed up as discernment, because it's easier to wait than to walk. It's easier to pray than to prepare. It's easier to say, God hasn't opened the door, than to admit, I never turned the handle. We've made passivity look holy. We've called it faith. But faith without works is fiction. You say you trust God, but you won't take the risk. You say you believe, but you won't move forward until the outcome is guaranteed. That's not faith. That's a contract. And God doesn't make deals based on your comfort. He calls you to act without knowing how it will turn out. He calls you to walk before the road looks safe. He calls you to speak, even when your voice trembles. But instead we stay in place, spiritual statues, waiting for a miracle while refusing to become the vessel it moves through. And then we blame God for the delay. We say maybe it's not His timing, when really it's not our obedience, because the truth is, God has already given you something, a thought, a burden, an idea that won't leave, a talent you've buried under fear and self-doubt. But you keep waiting for a louder voice, a brighter sign, a clearer command. You don't need another word. You need to act on the one He already gave you. Stillness is sacred, but only when it's Spirit-led, not when it's an excuse to stay comfortable. There is a moment where silence becomes disobedience, where waiting becomes rebellion, where delay becomes denial in disguise. We've created a theology of hiding. We've used spiritual language to mask human hesitation, but there is no faith in playing it safe. You weren't called to survive your life. You were called to live it, to build, to stretch, to become. But becoming requires motion, and motion begins with decision, not when the stars align, not when the finances make sense, not when every question is answered, now, right now, because what we call waiting on God, He might be calling disobedience. Not the loud kind, not the rebellious kind, but the quiet kind, the kind that says all the right things but does none of them. You say you trust Him, then show it. Take the first step, even if it's trembling. Because faith isn't about how still you can stand. It's about how far you're willing to walk when the path is unclear. Faith was never meant to keep you still. It was meant to move mountains. And sometimes the mountain isn't your circumstance. It's your mindset. If faith without works is dead, then what are you calling faith when there are no works? We cry, God, do something. But He's waiting on us to move, because God doesn't bless potential. He blesses obedience. He doesn't reward good intentions. He responds to faith in motion. You want God to part the waters, but you won't stretch out your hand. You want Him to rain down provision, but you won't gather the jars. He moves with you, not instead of you. The pattern has never changed. He told Noah to build. He told Abraham to go. He told Peter to step out of the boat. But all we do is talk. All we do is plan. All we do is postpone our purpose, and then dress the delay up as discernment. We say, I'm not ready, but God didn't ask if you were ready. He asked if you were willing. Readiness is your excuse. Obedience is His requirement. You want the mountain to move, but you won't even speak to it. You want the opportunity, but you ignore the preparation. You can't receive what you refuse to walk toward, and you can't walk toward what you keep making excuses to avoid. We say, I'm waiting for peace, but peace doesn't come before the step. Peace comes after trust, after movement, after you let go of the excuses that feel safe. Excuses will always feel safer than obedience, because obedience costs. It costs comfort, it costs pride, it costs control. But excuses let you stay where you are and feel spiritual doing it. You say, I'm praying about it. But prayer is not a substitute for obedience. Prayer is power, but power flows through motion, through action, through faith that puts its feet on the ground. Even Jesus didn't heal people while they sat still. He said, pick up your mat, stretch out your hand, go wash in the pool. There was always an action, always a step, because miracles don't fall into laps. They're walked into, stepped into, moved into. We keep asking God for outcomes while avoiding the actions that lead to them. We want the fruit, but we don't plant. We want the fire, but we don't gather wood. We want God to bless something we never had the courage to begin. And the truth is, you've been using prayer as a hiding place. You've been using planning as a delay tactic. You've been calling fear wisdom, just so you don't have to take the first step. But God is not mocked. He sees the motive behind your movement, and He sees the motive behind your delay, and He still waits. Not because He's slow, but because He refuses to force. You want Him to invade. He wants you to invite. You want Him to prove Himself. He wants you to trust Him enough to begin. You say, God hasn't opened the door. But maybe it was never a door. Maybe it was a wall waiting to be climbed. And maybe you haven't been blocked. You've just been too afraid to start building, because obedience isn't about ease. It's about surrender. It's not about seeing the finish line. It's about taking the first step without knowing where it leads. You think you're waiting for God to do something big, but God is waiting for you to do something small. Start, try, move, speak, write, build, forgive, apply, ask, serve. Do something even if it seems foolish. Even if it's small, even if you're scared, because movement invites miracles. God doesn't move through perfection. He moves through obedience, through raw, trembling, imperfect action that dares to believe He's already with you. So drop the excuses. They sound holy, but they're holding you hostage, and what you call waiting might just be disobedience in disguise. You keep calling it a season of waiting, but seasons change. Your patterns haven't. You think you're under divine delay, but maybe you're under self-imposed denial. Maybe the hold-up isn't from heaven, maybe it's from hesitation, because obedience was never the issue. Avoidance was, you prayed, you fasted, you journaled, but you never followed through, not because God didn't answer, but because you didn't like the answer he gave. We imagine God is slow to move, but what if he moved the moment you asked, and the delay came when you stayed still? What if the door opened long ago, and it's your fear that left it swinging on its hinges? What if the opportunity passed not because he withheld it, but because you refused to show up? We ask, why is nothing changing? But we refuse to change anything. We call it God's perfect timing, but we ignore the fact that he gave us the clock. Time doesn't stop for the disobedient. Opportunities don't sit still waiting for your fear to expire. You think you're waiting for the right feeling, but obedience was never a feeling, it was always a choice. And choices create momentum, but indecision creates delay. You say you're unsure, but you've been unsure for years, and your uncertainty has become a habit. Not everything unclear is mysterious. Sometimes it's just procrastination that we refuse to name. We say, maybe it's not meant to be, but maybe it was, and you missed it, not because God removed it, but because you never reached for it. We over-spiritualize our stagnation. We talk in circles. We stay in preparation mode because action feels too risky. But the risk of movement is always safer than the price of regret. You weren't confused, you were just comfortable, and comfort convinces you that delay is wisdom, that hesitation is caution, that inactivity is stillness. But none of it is true. Stillness without clarity is dangerous, because it gives birth to cycles, and cycles disguise themselves as seasons. You're not in a season, you're in a loop, going in circles. Praying the same prayers, making the same excuses, avoiding the same call, and then blaming God for not promoting a person who hasn't moved. He doesn't delay destiny, but he does wait for alignment. He doesn't hold back blessing, but he does protect it from mismanagement. Because why would he give more to someone who hasn't moved on what they already received? You want new revelation, but you haven't acted on the old instruction. And until you obey the last word, you won't hear the next one. God is not slow. He's strategic, and his strategy involves your decision, your responsibility, your stewardship of time. We say, I'm stuck. But being stuck isn't always external. Sometimes it's a mindset. Sometimes it's a choice you keep making in silence. You don't need another door. You need to stop locking the one he already opened. You're not blocked. You're distracted. You're not overlooked. You're avoiding. You're not delayed. You're denying yourself movement. And every time you retreat, you push the timeline further. Not because he's punishing you, but because he honors your decisions, even the ones that slow you down. And here's the truth. He won't force you forward. He loves you too much to drag you into purpose half-hearted. He invites, he prompts, he aligns, but you decide. So be honest, not religious, not poetic. Just honest. Have you really been waiting on God, or have you been avoiding the first step? Because delay isn't always from heaven. Sometimes it's from fear. Sometimes it's from pride. Sometimes it's from laziness dressed up as discernment. You're not in a waiting room. You're in a mirror, and the reflection is asking one thing. What are you really waiting for? You thought the delay was God's doing, but now you see it was yours, not a punishment. A pattern, one you built with your own choices. And here's the part we rarely admit. God gave you the ability to choose, and that ability is both your greatest gift and your greatest test. You're not a puppet. You're not a prisoner. You are a person with permission to rise or to remain. We ask God to take over, but he won't override what he designed for you to steward. He made you in his image, which means you don't just receive power. You carry responsibility, and responsibility is where most people drop the call, not because they lack faith, but because they fear freedom. Freedom means the choice is yours, and when the choice is yours, so is the outcome. That's why indecision feels safer. If I don't move, I can't fail. If I don't choose, I can't be wrong. But indecision is a decision, and avoiding risk is risking everything. Free will means he won't push you. He'll prompt you, he'll call you, he'll place the burden on your heart, but he won't drag you through the door you won't walk toward. We want him to make the choice for us. We want him to force the breakthrough. We want him to shake the earth until it makes our fear disappear, but love doesn't control, and real faith doesn't work without freedom. You say, God, take it from me. He says, no, you lay it down. You say, God, make it clear. He says, no, you choose and I'll go with you. Because he's not after blind obedience, he's after a willing heart, a soul that chooses him, not just waits for him to make all the moves. He didn't create robots, he created rulers. He placed dominion in your hands. And dominion requires decisions. That's the real test. Not will you believe in God, but will you believe he trusts you enough to make a move, even with uncertainty, even without guarantees, even knowing failure is still on the table. We're scared of that kind of freedom because it exposes our desire to blame God for what we control. So we stall, we hide, we replay the same prayers not because we're faithful, but because we're afraid of taking ownership. And God waits, not silently, but patiently, because love never forces. It waits for your yes, not your loud yes, not your public yes, your private, quiet, uncomfortable yes, the one that happens when you finally say, I have no proof, no perfect plan, no full clarity, but I will choose. That's free will, not just choosing between right and wrong, but choosing between fear and forward, between excuses and execution, between staying small or risking everything to become what he already sees. God doesn't micromanage destiny. He partners with your decisions. He responds to what you do with what he gave. You don't need to beg him for movement. You need to decide what to do with your feet, because free will isn't the absence of God. It's the opportunity to walk with him, and every time you say, I'm stuck, he reminds you you still have a choice. Every time you say, I'm scared, he whispers, then choose courage anyway, because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's movement in spite of it, and movement is how freedom shows its faith. You've been asking for permission, but free will means you already have it. He's not going to take the pen from your hand. He's waiting for you to start writing. The test isn't whether you heard him. It's whether you'll trust what you heard enough to act on it. And right now, you are not waiting on God. God is waiting on you to choose. You want clarity, but God is waiting for obedience. Because revelation doesn't come to the one who waits. It comes to the one who walks. He didn't tell Abraham the whole journey. He just said, go. And Abraham went. You ask for the blueprint. He gives you a step. And you call it vague, but heaven calls it faith. We say, I need more details. But God doesn't speak to satisfy curiosity. He speaks to reveal himself. As you move, you don't get the next instruction by sitting still. You get it by doing the last thing he told you. We cry out, God, what's next? And heaven replies, what did you do with the last word? Because obedience is not a suggestion, it's the unlocked code. The mystery isn't in his silence. It's in our refusal to act. You don't need a prophetic word. You need to follow through on the simple one, the one that said, forgive, give, apply, create, go, speak. But we wait for something dramatic, some angelic confirmation, some thunder in the sky, because we've convinced ourselves that deeper means louder. But God rarely shouts. He whispers, and whispers are only heard by those who come close. Obedience brings you close. We chase revelation like it's a puzzle, but it's not found in thinking harder, it's found in obeying faster. You don't outgrow the basics, you grow deeper in them, and the deeper you obey, the clearer he becomes. It's not a knowledge problem, it's a response problem. You know what to do, but you're waiting to feel ready. God never promised ease, He promised presence, and presence is revealed through obedience. You want the full picture, but He's testing your trust with the first stroke. You want the destination, but He's watching how you handle the first mile. Because revelation is not the reward for being curious. It's the reward for being committed. He's not hiding His will from you. He's hiding it in obedience, and every step you take reveals the next, like manna in the wilderness, just enough for today, and tomorrow's portion won't appear until you've walked through today's. But we want to know it all in advance. We want to control the outcome. We want the map, not the guide. But if you knew the full story, you'd try to edit it. You'd try to skip the hard chapters. You'd avoid the valleys that birth your strength. You'd rewrite what was meant to transform you. So He doesn't give you the whole thing. He gives you enough light to take one step, enough strength to say one yes, enough peace to quiet your fear for one day. And that one day of obedience unfolds into revelation, not just of what to do next, but of who He really is. You're not just walking into purpose, you're walking into awareness of His nearness, awareness of His voice, awareness of His nature, that He is faithful, that He is present, that He's not just speaking to you, He's walking with you. But none of that becomes real until obedience makes it personal. You can read about His goodness, but you won't know it until you follow Him through discomfort. You can quote His promises, but you won't taste them until obedience turns them from theory to testimony. We keep asking God to reveal more, but He's asking us to trust more, because the more you trust, the more you see. The more you act, the more He reveals. Not all at once, but exactly when you need it. That's not delay, that's design, because this was never about information. It was about intimacy, and intimacy doesn't come through answers, it comes through alignment. So if you feel stuck, if you feel like heaven is quiet, ask yourself, did you obey the last word? Because revelation doesn't come to the one who waits passively. It comes to the one who walks boldly, and the next door, it's not locked. It's waiting on your step. You asked for clarity. He told you to obey. You obeyed, and now something shifts, not out there in you, because the revelation you needed was not just about direction. It was about identity. You kept praying, God, send someone. But heaven kept echoing, why not you? You said, God, change the situation. He said, then let me change you, because you are the one I'll use. You were waiting for someone stronger, smarter, louder, more qualified, but God's answer wasn't a stranger. It was the reflection staring back at you in the mirror. You prayed for breakthrough, and God gave you the burden. You prayed for help, and He gave you the idea. You prayed for change, and He gave you the conviction that wouldn't go away, because heaven doesn't always send outside answers. Sometimes it sends you. We keep thinking someone else will fix it. Someone else will rise. Someone else will carry the weight. But maybe the burden on your heart is a sign that the solution is in your hands. Not because you're enough, but because God is, and He moves through people, not around them. We want Him to invade the world, but He chooses to transform it through your obedience. We say, God, the world is dark, but He already lit a flame inside of you. We say, God, fix the system, but He gave you the vision to rebuild it. You're not here by accident. You're here on assignment, and the frustration you feel, the restlessness, the ache to see something shift. That's not just emotion, that's calling. You think you're just praying about it, but God's been shaping you as the answer, the dream you keep seeing, the problem that won't leave your mind, the thing no one else seems to be doing. That's not coincidence. That's instruction. We ask God to send a move, but we don't want to be the ones who move first. We ask for revival, but we don't want to be the spark. But God won't hand you the solution if you're too afraid to become it. You keep waiting for a sign, but what if you're the sign, not perfect, not ready, not flawless, just available? God doesn't need your perfection. He needs your participation. He doesn't need your credentials. He needs your courage. You're praying for open doors, but maybe your hands were meant to build them. You're praying for restoration, but maybe your words were meant to begin it. You're praying for help. But maybe your story was meant to heal others. He placed the solution within you, not so you could keep it hidden, but so you could walk it out. And that fear you feel, it's normal, but it's not your guide. Courage doesn't mean the fear leaves. It means you go anyway. We say, "Who am I to do this?" But God says, "Who are you not to?" Moses stuttered. Esther was afraid. David was overlooked. But each of them became the answer to the very crisis they were born into. Why? Because they said yes, before the plan was clear, before the risk disappeared, before the odds looked fair. You don't become the answer once you feel confident. You become the answer the moment you decide to obey, to show up, to take the weight, to trust that if God gave you the burden, He already planted the grace. You were never meant to sit back and hope. You were meant to step in and act, to become the vessel, to become the change, to become the very thing you thought was someone else's responsibility. You're not waiting for a rescue. You are being positioned. You're not waiting for a sign. You are the sign. So stop praying for someone to rise. Stand up, look around and realize you are the answer to the prayer you've been praying.